Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to learn about financial hardship and cyber awareness. My name is Kathy Sundstrom, and I'm a consultant in NAB's Advisory and Awareness team, which forms part of Group Security. With me in the presentation today, I have the fantastic Chloe Elmer, who is a consultant in our customer care team, which in NAB Assist. Before we begin, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. The NAB recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as Australia's first people and the traditional custodians of the land where we live and work. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and we're proud to live in a country which is home to the world's oldest living cultures. Chloe, passing over to you to talk a little bit about financial hardship.
Thanks, Kathy. As Kathy said, my name's Chloe. I've worked in NAB Assist's customer care team for a little over a decade now. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about understanding financial hardship at NAB and what support options we've got available. As you all know, financial difficulty can occur for many different reasons and can really happen to anyone. When customers are not able to pay their loans, they can speak to their banks about support options, which banks would call financial hardship or financial hardship support. Many people are really one unexpected life event away from experiencing financial difficulty, and we know that many of our mutual clients are experiencing some form of financial difficulty given the current economic climate and cost of living pressures. NAB is committed to supporting customers experiencing financial difficulty and wants all of our customers to know that we're here to help. We're encouraging our customers and their representatives to get in touch with NAB early to support customers getting back on track. Customers can either contact our team directly via our online form or by calling our teams, flicking off an email, however they choose. And ultimately, they can appoint a representative to contact us on their behalf, which is commonly financial counsellors who would do that. This year, NAB has reached out to over 570,000 customers to check in on financial wellbeing and let them know that they can reach out if they need assistance. More broadly, in the lead up to interest rate increases, we contact customers in advance so that they can prepare for changes to their repayments. On this slide, you'll just see the various phone numbers and contact points for the team, which we can share with you. If you want to move to the next slide, Kathy. This slide is just really talking to the sorts of customers that NAB Assist commonly sees and who we support. So we support everyone from mum and dad borrowers through to small businesses and support customers through some really serious moments in their life, including serious illness, domestic and family violence, and customers who've been victim of a scam or cybercrime. The key sort of message is that financial difficulty can really happen to anyone. It can be someone who's lost a job, had a reduction in income, a breakdown in a relationship, experienced a natural disaster, illness, injury, and so on. The support that NAB Assist can provide will be or can be directly related to their lending and making arrangements with them on their credit cards and loans. But sometimes we need to provide support to customers that's non-financial. This includes our partnerships with external support services to make sure we're giving customers wraparound holistic care outside of banking. We also like to make sure that our customers are able to bank safely and securely, providing support options to customers such as gambling blocks on cards or opening new accounts for customers experiencing family violence. With how we help, we've got a lot of different sort of support options for customers, and everything that we provide is tailored. But typically what assistance will look like is reduced payment arrangements and temporary payment breaks. But in NAB Assist, we really listen to what the customer's situation is. We try to care and understand with what's happened with their life and try to understand how it's impacting them financially. We tailor support and options to the customer, both for the short term and long term. And we also like to tie in any sort of external support to make sure that the customers are really getting wraparound care. In short, basically, we work out what assistance works best for the individual rather than just provide what we think is a blanket sort of support option. But typically, as I say, the assistance will look like a payment break or a payment arrangement for a short period of time. And then we check in with the customer to see how we can help them get back on track. And when customers need more than hardship support through our customer support hub teams and across many of our teams in NAB Assist, we'll look to refer them to our external service providers such as Uniting Caring to provide casework support for people experiencing things like family violence, housing challenges, financial difficulties and mental health issues, as well as energy literacy programs and financial counselling. And as many of you will know, what we'll also do is support customers with a referral through to the National Debt Helpline to help people get back on track with things like budgeting and managing many debts. So particularly if a customer has multiple debts across multiple lenders and so on. As I said, all assistance is case by case, and what's provided for one customer can be very different to what's provided for another. And in addition to that, we have quite a large team in NAB Assist, but the team are very well trained in how to have respectful conversations with customers and their representatives, and they're trained to provide good support to customers experiencing difficulty. The team themselves are also supported with a really robust wellbeing program to make sure that they're able to look after their own wellbeing so that they can effectively look after the wellbeing of our customers. And just to highlight the teams again, we've got a few different teams in NAB Assist. It's quite a big department, but the main teams that you'll deal with typically sit within our customer care team. So customer care is sort of the front door for customers experiencing financial hardship. So any customer can call through to the 1-800 number for this team and speak to us about hardship assistance. Within that team, you've also got business customer care for our small business clients and customer care solutions who support customers in the medium to long term experiencing financial difficulty. Within customer care as well, the team that you'd be most familiar with is the financial counsellor support team, who work with financial counsellors directly to support clients experiencing financial difficulty. And in addition to the hardship support teams, we've got our customer support hub, who works with customers experiencing vulnerability. Their support really extends beyond the typical hardship support, and they look to things like banking safety, for example, issuing new cards to clients experiencing family violence, or helping them sort out how their accounts are set up and those sorts of things. But yeah, in short, that's the NAB Assist team. And I'll hand back over to Kathy to talk a bit about scams and cybercrimes.
Thanks, Chloe. So as mentioned in the beginning, my name is Kathy Sandstrom and I'm with the Advisory and Awareness team. I've been with NAB for the past year in this team, and our role is pretty much focusing on the human element of cybersecurity. Because within group security, we've got our people making sure our products and our platforms are secure. But as we know, and as we'll see in the next couple of slides, cyber criminals aren't targeting the tech. They're targeting that human element in the hope that they can persuade somebody to click on a link or engage in a conversation and provide remote access. So we're going to have a look at how they're going about doing this. But first of all, when it comes to scams and customer vulnerability, which is something that Chloe has covered in quite a lot of detail, we can see that increasingly customers are experiencing financial difficulty or vulnerability because they've been impacted by a scam. So when we look at the conversations that have come through and customers supported in 2022, we can see that as many as 28% of those conversations involve some kind of scam or cybercrime element. When we look at the broader picture and how cybercrime is impacting Australia, we have to look at that figure on the left, that 33B. What's that B for? That's $33 billion. Now that's the amount of self-reported losses from cybercrime in 2021. What we know about that figure is that it's not declining. In fact, when we look at phone calls that come through to NAB, as well as to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre on a daily basis, there's that continued increase. And as I mentioned, so much of this involves the human element. In fact, as many as 74% of breaches were recently shown to involve that human element. It's not just impacting individuals, it's obviously also having a big impact on businesses, with $88,000 being the average reported loss. Now, we're only talking with these figures here, we're talking about the financial loss. In no way are these capturing the devastation that we know that scams cause, the psychological and the reputational damage that we know scams cause. And a quick takeaway figure there on the bottom of the screen, a report is made to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, that's the government's portal, reports cyber every 7 minutes. In the time that Chloe and I are talking to you here today, we can reasonably assume that at least 4 other people have contacted the government body to report being involved in some kind of cyber incident. If we look at some of the national scam trends that impacted Australians last year, we can see that by far the biggest scam type is an investment scam, with $1.5 billion in reported losses. We know that around 3.1 billion was the overall amount reported in losses from scams alone, not just cybercrime last year. So when we put 1.5 billion in that picture, we can see that this is something that cyber criminals are very invested in. They spend a lot of time doing their research to try and get you to engage with them about investment opportunities. Just after investment scams, we can see that remote access scam, where the criminal persuades you to give them access to your computer either by downloading a kind of a software program that gives them access, such as AnyDesk or TeamViewer. More recently, we've noticed it can be as simple as clicking on a link on a fake website that they've created. So it's something that continuously evolves. And that's the really interesting part about cybercrime, and also the scary part to consider, is it's such an evolving landscape, and it's one that we constantly have to ensure we stay up to date on the latest threats. One of the main ways scammers contacted us in the last year was through SMS phishing. And the methods that they use to contact us constantly evolve. So last year, the main way that they were engaging with us was through phone calls. This year, it shifted to SMS phishing. And there's a good reason for that. It's because of something called spoofing. So scammers have been able to use technology to change the way their number appears in your phone when they're contacting you. And if we look at the example on the screen, you can see how this plays out. So Vicky is obviously a NAB customer. She has NAB saved in her phone. She gets text messages, a lot of legitimate text messages that she has received from NAB. But then there's one that is from a cyber criminal. I'm hoping all of you can spot it really easily, but just in case you can't, I've highlighted it for you. Now you can understand, if you were Vicky, why this would be so confusing. She's likely to think one of three things. She's either likely to think that NAB's been involved, that there's a cyber criminal working at NAB is sending her these phishing links, or she might think that NAB's been involved in some kind of data breach incident. Neither are true. It's simply a case that criminals have manipulated technology that's readily available to be able to send these messages. In good news, NAB has done a lot of work with the telecommunications industry and with government to limit the ability of criminals to be able to use our name, the NAB name, in sending these kind of messages. And you might also heard recently we've introduced a lot of new measures to try and combat this from happening. So we'll no longer send you a text message, an unexpected text message. You won't receive one out of the blue from NAB that contains any kind of link. So if Vicky receives a message like the one on her screen, and she can check it for those red flags, such as, it's asking her to click a link, she knows it's not from NAB, and she can report it to our fish@nab.com.au or on the text number that's on your screen, and that'll keep us informed, and then just delete it. But it's really important that we learn to identify the red flags in the messages that we're receiving on a daily basis, whether that message is via text, phone call, or email. And if you look at the screen, there's some other examples of text messages that we know criminals are using. So even though we've been able to block them from using the NAB alpha tag or impersonating NAB directly when they send you those text messages, they do try and work around that by sending it as something that's slightly different that you might still consider to be from NAB. What would happen if Vicky were to click on that link? It's going to take her to a very convincing looking fake website like the one you can see on her screen. And it's why it's so important that we learn to educate ourselves, our family, and our friends on how to identify phishing messages. Because if she were to click on that link and she ended up on a page that looked like this, because they're so skilled at copying our branding and the way we set up these pages, it's very hard to identify that it's a fake website set up by a cyber criminal just by looking at this. Now, there are some red flags. For example, you can see that there's after the AU, there's a dot that says client secured. Our style is /, but the normal person probably wouldn't know that. So it's really important that we educate everybody not to go onto banking sites by clicking on links. And again, goes back to that initial message. If you receive a text message from NAB and it's containing a link, you can pretty much assume it's from a cyber criminal. What's interesting about this page too, and this is something to consider going forward, is they're not only after the money in your bank account, they're also after your identity. So we can see on this website, they're trying to get Vicky to provide her driver license and her passport and her Medicare card, because your identity has value too. After SMS, the next main way they're contacting us is through phone scans. And again, it's that spoofing, the ability of criminals to use technology to change the way their number appears in our phones that assisted them in this case, because it used to be easy to identify a scam call because it was likely to come from overseas or from a place that you didn't recognize. Now it's not so easy because they can use the technology to make their number appear as if it's coming from anywhere in Australia, or numbers that you might even think you recognize. So we have to, when it comes to receiving incoming phone calls or text messages, we have to be on alert and just check that message and consider it if there's anything that's raising an alarm bell. And then if there is an alarm bell, if they're asking you to provide information such as your codes or access to your accounts, anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, then really the best thing that you can do is hang up and call the organization back on the number that you have, either the number on the back of your card or the number that's available on publicly listed places on their official website. Because the thing about spoofing is it only works on incoming calls and text messages. So if you were to hang up and call the person back on their official number, you will end up with the intended party. It's a really simple piece of advice, but it can make such a big difference in this space. And on the screen, we have some other examples of scam calls that we know have been going around in the community. Perhaps there's one there that you can recognize because you've received it too. What's also really interesting to consider is that government and industry are working around the clock together to try and combat these scam techniques. Healthcare Indicator was blocking 12 to 15 million scam calls a month earlier this year. And yet we all know that we continue to receive them. So it's really important that we can't just rely on others to be able to block them from contacting us. We need to be able to educate ourselves on how to identify these red flags. And of course, the third main way they're contacting us, and this is particularly important if you happen to own a business, is through email. And it's important that we educate our family and our friends how to identify suspicious emails and to check it for the red flags. So if we have a look at the example on the screen, this is an email that we know that a criminal was sending to some people in the community. And at first glance, it looks pretty convincing because, as you can see, they've used the correct NAB branding and it's reasonably well written. Thanks to tools like ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, the days of being able to spot a dodgy email by looking for those typos are long gone. We can expect the messaging to be increasingly sophisticated and to be free of any errors. So how do we go about checking an email and making sure it's not from a cyber criminal? We need to look for the red flag, and it really starts with checking who is actually sending you the email. And if we look at the example on the screen, we can see that they might have tried to make the email look like it was coming from nab.com.au, but when you had a close look to it actually being sent from, you can see that email address in no way replicates one that you'd expect to receive from your bank. So it's really important when you receive an email to check who it's actually coming from and check closely, because sometimes there's some email addresses, it can be the difference between an I changed into a 1 that makes all the difference as to who you think you're engaging with. So that's the first thing that you can do, the first red flag to check out for, who is sending you the actual email. Another giveaway that we also saw in the previous example with the text messages that Vicky was receiving is that this email has no greeting. Now, when we send you an email or we send you a text message, we generally address you by name because we know who you are. You are our customer, or the people who are receiving these messages from us, they are our customers. Now, criminals don't know who they're sending it to. They don't know if the person banks at NAB. What they're doing is they're adopting what they like to call a sort of a spray and pray approach. And they send them out en masse, and they're hoping to catch a person in the moment, a person who banks at NAB, and a person who might be concerned about their account. Possibly they've been involved in some kind of data breach incident, or they've heard a lot about cybercrime on the news, and they are heightened and extra cautious. They receive something like this saying their account has been disabled, and they don't check it for their red flags, and they just enact by clicking the confirm button, clicking on that link. So when you receive an email or a text message, we have what we call the 3-step stop. Think, look through it, check for those red flags, and then protect your account. The next red flag is it's requesting personal details. And if it has that urgency in the request, criminals like to use messages that have that element of urgency or that offer of great reward in them because they know that it triggers a different part of our brains. It's called the amygdala. When we have messages that have that, if you don't do this now, something bad's going to happen, or if you don't do this quickly, or if you do this quickly, you stand a chance of winning a lot of money. Psychologists have identified how it causes a different part of our brains to trigger, and it causes our brains to feel that we have to act in the moment. And that's exactly what a criminal wants. It wants you to ignore the red flag, feel that sense of urgency, and go ahead and click on that link. So again, if emails that are asking you to click on a link are emails that you need to just be suspicious of, particularly of where the link is taking you to. If it's a link that tells you it's going to take you to a site, a banking site, you can be assured that it's probably from a criminal, and then you can forward to fish@nab.com.au. A last expert tip, if you get an email that includes a link in it, you can hover over the link and it'll give you an indication of the website that it's going to take you to. And as you can see in the example on the screen, it's clearly not your banking website. And then, of course, the next area that we really need to educate ourselves and be aware of, because when it happens, it can be so devastating, is malware, downloading malware onto your computer. Malware is just malicious software. And most often this is spread through phishing messages. So how do we protect ourselves and make sure that we don't download malware on our device? This is an example of a phishing email that was being sent that contained malware. So again, it goes through checking the email for those red flags. Who was the email sent from? As you can see on this example, it doesn't match the actual organization. Again, it's generically addressed, dear customer, instead of to you personally. And there's that offer of a threat reward, there's no official sign-off, and there's that link to click on. Lastly, we're going to have a quick talk through ransomware, because we tend to think of ransomware in association with large organizations that might make news headlines. The reality is cyber criminals can use ransomware to target individuals as well as small and micro businesses. Again, ransomware is primarily delivered through suspicious attachments or links in emails, but it can also be delivered when visiting unsafe websites. So we did see, prior to joining NAB, I worked at a national charity called ID Care. And when we were working over there, we did see that some people had received or had indicated they downloaded malware after visiting pirated video sites. So it's really important to be careful on the sites that you visit. The goal of ransomware is to disrupt businesses with the aim of getting you to pay a ransom. So you might wake up one day and you open up your computer and you end up with a message like we can see on the screen there, telling you that all your files have been encrypted. And if you want to be able to recover your files, you need to pay the ransom, usually in Bitcoin, within a certain time frame. If you try and access those files, all that you get is gobbledygook. So how do we protect against ransomware? Again, it's about being aware of those phishing messages. It's also really important that we keep our operating systems and applications up to date. So when your phone asks you for an app update or your computer says it needs to do an update, don't ignore it, allow it to happen. Because what that is doing is that it's ensuring that the most up-to-date systems and the most up-to-date security fixes are installed on your device. It's also really important that you back up your data and practice restoring your backup. So if something does go wrong, you wake up one day and you discover you don't have access to any of the files stored on your computer or your device, it's not the end of the world because you have that valuable information stored somewhere else that you can quickly gain access to once again. But as I say, it's all fine and well practicing, or it's all fine and well backing up the data, but you really need to practice it. I was at a breakfast a couple of weeks ago where I spoke to a young businessman who had experienced a ransomware attack on his computer. And he said that he did have a backup process in place, but when he tested that backup process, discovered he could only get 30% of his data back. So just like we practice fire drills, practice cyber drills, and make sure that you're backing up your data and you're checking to see that it works for you. If you wake up and you discover this kind of message on your computer and you realize you've been subjected to a ransomware attack, what can you do in the moment? Disconnect from the internet as soon as possible. You can try Alt Control Delete in Task Manager to try and stop the unknown application. But otherwise, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has an excellent guide on what to do if you're held to ransom. It's really a worthwhile place to look at. And where to go for more information. So I know we've covered a lot in a very short space of time. nab.com.au security has a lot of information on current scams, investment scams, romance scams, how they work, and what you can do to protect yourself. In the Security Hub, we also have access to our monthly webinars, where we do sessions like this that anybody can attend for both personal and for businesses. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre also has an excellent website where you can find a lot more information. And of course, ScamWatch, the government ScamWatch site, also provides advice on the latest scams that we see impacting the Australian community. Now, we've talked a lot about what you can do, but it's really important we understand that we appreciate that fighting cybercrime is a team effort. And NAB is working around the clock and introducing a whole lot of new measures to make sure that you're protected. Some of the measures that we've put in place are indicated on the screen. So we do have obviously 24/7 monitoring of your account. We've removed links from nearly all our text messages, and we've created additional steps in our payment processes, particularly if you're making a transfer that's picked up as being unusual. You will get a message in-app asking you if you're aware of the scam type and if you want the transfer to continue. All these little steps we're already discovering are making a big difference. And these are just some of over 64 new measures that we're introducing across the bank to make sure we're doing our part to help keep you safe. As we've talked about how you can help protect yourself, you've started in the right place because you're listening to a session like this where we're highlighting some of the common threats that we see. But it really is important that you're aware of those red flags that indicate a text, a phone call, or an email is suspicious. The reality is we need to treat all incoming texts and phone calls and emails as suspicious until we've checked them to see if any of those red flags are present. And it's also important that you check your statements regularly. If you notice an unusual transaction, don't ignore it and think, even if it's a small amount, but try and establish if there's something that you might have been aware of, or if you need to contact us. So using a Pay ID is really useful because it helps you identify who you're transferring your money to. So it's a really simple process of being able to transfer funds instantaneously, but instead of sending it to a BSB account, you send it to a person's, you just type in the person to set up Pay ID, and then it's simply a case of using the person's mobile number or email, and it identifies the account directly. There is some other tips that are on the screen, and of course, if you have any questions, you can always get back to us. But as I said, stay informed. Cyber criminals quickly change their tactics. Some of the tips that we're providing on the screen today might have changed in a couple of months' time as their systems have evolved. So it's a case of constantly staying informed. I'm going to pass over back to Chloe, who's going to share some case studies.
Thanks, Kathy. These case studies are just talking to a few customers that we've supported with hardship assistance at NAB for various scenarios. The first one is a customer called Betty, who's reached out to a financial counsellor mid last year to get some support with her budget and expenses. Betty and her financial counsellor Judy worked together to set up a letter of authority to be able to speak to NAB through our financial counsellor support team. Through all of that, they went through Betty's budget to make sure that she knew where her money was going, what her budget was, and what she could and couldn't afford. Our team then worked with Judy on Betty's behalf to understand that Betty was on a pension. Her budget was in a deficit position at each fortnight, which meant that she wasn't able to continue to afford her NAB debt. She had a few expenses that were obviously non-negotiable, so things like rent, food, her utilities, etc. And that's obviously always priority to make sure that people are able to afford their living expenses. Judy provided NAB with a statement of financial position, so an outline of the budget, incoming and outgoing, and the relevant documentation that NAB would require to be able to close off Betty's account, which we did. We closed the account, we agreed to a reduced payment arrangement, and Betty paid back 30% of the debt over 5 years, and we waived the remainder of that account for Betty, which is something that we would do when a customer is no longer able to afford the account in specific circumstances. Another example of how we've supported a customer is John. So John has had a history of heart problems, and after visiting a hospital, his doctor has recommended that he needed to take some time off work, or ideally stop working altogether. John has a home loan with NAB, and he had some savings, so taking some time off for the short term was not a big issue. However, when his health didn't improve, he needed to extend his sick leave at work, which in his words threw his life into financial chaos. John requested to access his super under compassionate grounds, which was declined, but he needed some more breathing room for a few more months until he could figure out if he would be able to return to work, or return to work part-time in his case. John contacted customer care, who provided a payment moratorium or a payment break, which meant that his biggest bill, his home loan, was no longer a stress for him, and he could divert the money that he had to covering his day-to-day living expenses. John later on did go back to work part-time, which meant he was able to recommence payments on his home loan, so he was able to get all that back on track, which was great. In the last two case studies, we've got a customer called Harry, who was supported through our customer support hub team. Harry had a declined transaction on his card at the supermarket, and he thought that he should have had $140,000 in his account when he didn't. This was shocking to him, so he went into the branch and discovered he only had $100. The branch contacted our customer support hub, and it was identified that there were a large number of banking transfers from his account to his granddaughter's account, or an account in his granddaughter's name. We're obviously not able to provide straight away on the phone exactly where the money's gone and who the account belongs to, but so initially Harry blamed NAB for losing his money. He thought that we'd stolen it from him, and we had to have several ongoing open conversations with Harry about financial abuse, what it looks like, what some of the red flags are, and what some of the behaviours he might see in his account, etc., to help him understand what was going on. After a while, Harry understood that what was happening was fraud. His granddaughter had accessed his account, she'd moved money without contacting him, and those sorts of things. With the help of Customer Support Hub, Harry was able to lodge a police report. He was referred to Senior Rights Victoria, and we helped him reset all of his banking passwords so that he had safe access to his banking and control over his finances. And those referrals obviously help him in the long term to be able to figure out what's going on with his money, and next steps he needs to take as well. And lastly, we had a customer called Andrew. He had a credit card for over 2 decades. In the last few years, he's obviously older, he's moved on to a disability pension payment, and he's been using a credit card sporadically to assist with covering living expenses. So he stopped using the card for just big purchases here and there, or small purchases here and there. It started to become how he managed paying his bills and those sorts of things. So he was juggling a lot of expenses, including rent, utilities, and had a number of medical issues that made working or increasing his income position impossible. Andrew approached a financial counsellor, Tim, who helped him with discussing budgeting and speaking to all of his creditors. So Andrew had a few creditors that he had loans with, and Tim worked with him to understand that he couldn't afford those bills, but he also couldn't use those accounts anymore to continue to cover things like food and those sorts of living expenses. But if he didn't have the debts to pay, he could manage his general day-to-day budget. Tim supplied NAB with a statement of position, the relevant medical documentations and Centrelink statements to highlight that Andrew was able to cover living expenses, but not his debt, and was also not in any position in the medium to long term, or really ever, to be able to increase his income position and do anything about paying these things back, which meant that in this circumstance, it was clear that NAB would waive the credit card debt, because there was not a lot of point in trying to, I guess, collect on that amount of money where he was clearly not able to pay it. So we did that with Tim. And yeah, those are just some of the examples of how we can help.
Thanks, Chloe. At the end of a session like this, we would welcome any opportunities to discuss topics that have been raised today. When it comes to being able to ask questions of us directly, you can always go to when it comes to cyber questions, you can always go and register for one of our cyber awareness sessions that we run monthly. If you go to nab.com.au security, you'll find them in there. Chloe, if people have other questions, which is the best way to get in contact with somebody?
If you're working with a client and you have a question about managing their debt repayments or a hardship arrangement, get in touch with our financial counsellor support team, which was the contact details in the first slide of this pack. Yeah, that's the best way.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Chloe, for joining me today in this presentation. And we hope you found it of use.